It is wonderful to be surrounded by such beautiful words of I'm already happy because the sun is shining. I'm now extra happy. So it's really, really a great pleasure and a great pleasure to come here. So thank you for the invitation. And also thank, if you please give my thanks to Carol for being, she's an amazing board member of Moving Traditions and makes so much of what we do possible. So it's great to feel that I'm connected so closely to someone here in this institution, and it's a pleasure to speak with you this morning. I am the kind of person who believes that the gender lens is essential every time that we read Torah. And that was what I thought before I started to read. That's good, that's classic. Before I started to read this week's Parsha, because this week's Parsha has nothing to do with gender. It's about IKEA and Home Depot. It is Legoland meets Shinto shrine. Not only is this Parsha not about gender, it is not about living beings. It is about a physical structure. It's about wood and melted metal and various fabrics. And the most exciting part is a pair of gold-winged angels that remind me of the Caesar's Palace Casino or perhaps Valentine's Day. As my daughter would say, there's not much drama to draw from in this week's Parsha. And then, in yet another episode in my rabbinic life of Saved by the Agadah, I learned that yes, this building, this Mishkan, is profoundly gendered. Let me share with you the commentary on the verse that we're all familiar with. It's on the very first page of this prayer book. Asu li mikdash, make for me a sanctuary that I may dwell amongst you. Commenting on the verse, Exodus Rabbah says, here's a story. A king has a daughter who he is marrying off to a ruler of another land, a king with a daughter. When the king's son-in-law wished to return to his own country with his new wife, the king would tell his son-in-law, I can't say to you, don't take her, for my daughter is now your wife. However, I ask of you that wherever you go to live, you have a chamber ready for me, that I may dwell with you. For I cannot leave my daughter. So too the Midrash explains that God said to Israel, I have given you a Torah from which I cannot part, and I also cannot tell you not to take it. But I request that wherever you go, make for me a house in which I will be able to dwell. Now we have some rich and rather intense gendered imagery to play with. Some initial thoughts. First off, the Torah has just become a young woman. In this case, the king's daughter. The Mishkan, in this allegory, is a room set aside for a man that exists in relation to this woman. Wherever this woman travels, the Mishkan, the chamber, must be near her. But isn't it ironic that the daughter, who is symbolic of Torah, has no voice? She has no divrei Torah. Only the father speaks. And while he grants freedom to his son-in-law, the young woman remains an object, or to be more accurate, a desired object. In the back of my mind, I see a masculine God played by James Gandolfini, who grants partial freedom to his daughter, but ultimately does not let her out from under his shadow. These are the initial ideas that come in my mind when I read a text like this with a gender lens. But this is not the Torah that I want to teach. My goal this morning is to suggest a different gender lens with which to read this text. One that is related to the lives of teenagers today, and one which will tell us something about the meaning both of Torah and of Mishkan. But before I do that, I want to say a few words about how I started thinking about Torah and gender. 20 years ago, it's hard to believe it was 20 years ago, but 20 years ago, I was a young student at the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. And I had the great, amazing pleasure and honor to study and learn from Dr. Tikva Freimer-Kensky. Now, if any of you ever had the chance to meet with Tikva, you know she was a powerhouse. In 1977, she got a PhD from Yale in Assyriology and Sumerology. She was the only woman in every room she stepped in. She was the first female scholar to challenge men who for years had been spouting all sorts of things about ancient biblical culture and pre-biblical culture. She was the first woman recognized by the Jewish Publication Society as a distinguished scholar who deserved her own series. Tikva Freimer-Kensky was a powerhouse as a scholar, and she was an incredible person. I will never forget sitting on her back porch, listening to her tell us the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was like a time outside of time listening to her tell the story. Now, in Tikva's class, she undermined the idea that there is something called the patriarchy in Torah, because she felt like Torah was actually a synthesis of feminine and masculine mythic idioms, including lactating trees, fertility goddesses, and birthing stones, as well as warrior gods and storm kings of the region. While many of us were busy writing gender-neutral liturgy, Tikva was busy sharing 4,000-year-old Hebrew amulet inscriptions for pregnant women. She loved to talk about ancient understandings of sexuality, and probably the best moment in her class was when she was lecturing on circumcision, and she said, "I'm not a very good artist. Could someone come up to the board and draw an uncircumcised penis?" It was a wonderful time in terms of Jewish life and feminist scholarship and new thinking about gender, sexuality, and ritual. Leslie Newman came to class one day and read us from her new book about Heather and her two mommies. We all had dog-eared copies of Judith Butler's Gender Trouble, and every baby girl born in the community would be welcomed with a naming / foot washing / new song ceremony that seemed to go on for 5 hours. Needless to say, towards the end of rabbinical school, there were lively debates about the merits of Xena, warrior princess. That was 20 years ago. And for 2 decades now, we in liberal Jewish circles have taught that gender is a social construct, that gender is something artificially bifurcated, that gender is a performance. And you know what? It's all true. There isn't something essential about gender. Male and female is not hardwired in our brains like blue and pink software, and gender is not in our hardware either. As we all graduated rabbinical school, eager to transform liturgy and communal practice, we envisioned a world that was gender-free, gender-neutral, and post-gender. And then we met teenagers. If you have not spent time lately with this fascinating subspecies of human, they tend to travel in packs, subsist on snack foods, communicate through cryptic digital clicks, and spend a great deal of time covering up their various skin conditions with products extracted from botanical elements. 2 of these creatures happen to live under my roof. I know. My colleagues and I had thought that the gender roles were not as a big deal anymore for teenagers because we were diverted by news stories that seemed to point in that direction. We'd heard about Title IX in women's sports. We knew that girls were doing better in middle school, even in math. Gay-straight alliances were making high school bearable for LGBTQI students. We had thought that things were getting better. And then, as we met teens who were struggling to conform to unrealistic gender expectations, we started to realize that things might have actually gotten worse. We heard a lot of confusion from teens, as well as stories of prescription drug use and abuse, eating disorders, date rape, and a lack of clarity of what it meant to suddenly have friends with benefits. Things were certainly not getting much better for girls. Things were definitely getting much worse for guys. And LGBTQI teens were facing new types of harassment. Looking at the generation, we asked, how did a group of parents who all went through school influenced by feminism end up raising teens who are struggling under the weight of gender expectation? Did they change? Did society change? What happened? I want to suggest that yes, the world is changing. And I want to speak specifically about how teen boys are dealing with those changes. The first element of change is related to the rise of niche marketing and new media. I remember reading a story in 2008 about how executives had decided that the Disney Channel was losing tween boys. So they launched Disney XD, a channel for tween boys that would show more violent shows, or as they said, more action. Teen Nick saw a similar opening in niche programs for tween girls, and they added more drama. Nintendo saw a new market and started to program video games specifically for girls and developed successful new lines of games that encourage girls to care for ponies or make sushi for ponies, while their brothers hunted down unibrowed terrorists. Rather than expand gender possibilities, the explosion of new media actually affirmed old, outdated gender lines. The result is that as we've seen the amount of screen time rise significantly in the lives of tweens and teens, we've also seen the emergence of fairly gender-segregated virtual spaces. With this has come the rapid rise of both reality television and pornography. And these related genres solidify gender roles and give teens a constant stream of supposedly real men and women, straight and gay, who model what it is like to be a real man or woman, rather than watch actors in sitcoms or dramas who can ridicule or subvert their gender roles. In reality shows, teens watch non-actors who vie for popularity in highly gendered environments. For more than 90% of teens, their primary source of sex education is hardcore pornography. The media is providing them with a steady stream of what it means to be a cool guy or a hot girl. So educators and parents are now stuck with the very complicated task of teaching teens how to be critical about what Ariel Levy has called the rise of raunch culture. A second factor, I believe, is at work, and that is the decline in what I would term social intimacy. Most of us are familiar with Robert Putnam's work in the late 1990s describing how communal organizations were breaking down in the United States. Well, since that time, the rise of online social networking has certainly increased, but the amount of time that teens spend with friends in what was once called hanging out, that activity that you do away from parents, hanging out, has been in sharp decline. This has been a profound problem, specifically for teen boys. A dynamic beautifully chronicled in Niobe Way, a professor right down here at NYU, in her book Deep Secrets, which came out last year. She writes about the decline in intimate friendships among boys as they go through high school. They start out very strong in the beginning of high school, and they begin to unravel. She writes about the sense of loss and isolation that these boys feel. Couple this with a world in which boys are losing out to girls academically, and fewer boys are going to college, and boys are spending increasingly more time online than girls, and you get a picture of the challenges that we have with today's boys. So what does this have to do with the Jewish community and how we raise men? First off, we have and are missing an opportunity. More than 70% of Jewish boys have a bar mitzvah, and most of them do so with the support of a cantor, a rabbi, or an educator. The problem is the conversation, what does it mean to be a man, has somehow been erased. I know this from my own sons. My own sons went through bar mitzvah. They learned to do a social action project. They learned how to lead services. They learned how to write a speech. They learned how to learn Torah. No one ever asked them, what does it mean for you to be a man? It just wasn't part of their education. What happens during that bar mitzvah year and the year after it is, I believe, a make it or break it situation for us as educators and for the Jewish community's future. If teens can get the guidance that they are able to receive from mentors and some skills to deal with their peers, there's a profound change that can happen. I've seen it in the last year. Just in New York, we have 15 groups of boys, 15 mentors who are working with boys, meeting with them once a month. I see Jeff from Larchmont is back there. He's got an amazing group. He's got Andrew Paul as a mentor with those guys in his community. There is some powerful stuff going on with these groups. For example, guys are learning that you have more emotions than anger, that having a six-pack is not going to bring them true happiness, that there is a difference between kissing someone and kissing with someone. And after the tefillah this morning, I'm going to be speaking at lunch, and so if anybody wants to join me, I'm going to say a little bit more about the Shevat Achim, the Brotherhood program that we are working on for guys, and a little bit about Rosh Chodesh for girls, and about moving traditions in general. But for now, I want to return to the Midrash. A father marries off his daughter. The son-in-law moves her to his kingdom. The father-in-law says, "Build me a chamber so I can dwell with you." I want to read this text from a gender perspective that is not philosophic or political, but is deeply feminist. One of the great insights of second-wave feminism was the argument that we must dredge through the personal, the embodied, and the messy stories on the path to get to the universal. To quote the brilliant Dr. Rachel Adler, one of the editors of the Woman's Commentary that we have here, I choose to walk through stories, searching for the waters of salvation, the hidden springs of laughter that well up once we are willing to relinquish the suffocating security of the dominator or the smoldering grudge of the victim. So I'd like to read this agadic text, not as a rabbi or a scholar, but simply as the guy that I am, as the man who I am. And I want to walk through the text with my own life. My beloved, Lisa, grew up very close with her father. The more I got to know Mel, my father-in-law, the more I appreciated hanging on the back porch with him and drinking beers or shooting hoops with him in the driveway. Even though golf is definitely not my thing, playing golf with Mel was a delight. He would always ask me how work was going and help me with the challenges it brought. He called me boy chick. He was proud of me. He wanted me to be happy. Then I watched Mel face a long battle with lung cancer that included a decade of chemotherapy and 3 brain radiations. During that time, he wanted to be near Lisa and our children as much as he could, and he lived over an hour away. I ask of you that wherever you go to live, that you have a chamber ready for me, that I may dwell with you. We set up a comfortable bed for him downstairs. 2 years ago, his last Yom Kippur on earth, he stayed with us and rested on that bed. Through Mel's many visits and our visits to see him and my amazingly resilient mother-in-law, I got a picture of what kind of father I want to be to my daughter. I got to think about what kind of grandfather I might be if I merit grandchildren someday. Approaching the text in this way: as a man, Torah and Mishkan are transformed. I am the son-in-law in the Agadah, and Torah is the wisdom I benefit from each day that I am fortunate to deepen my relationship with the person in this world who knows me best. And God knows that revelation happens in the conversations that are the most difficult to hear. My Torah and I are in dialogue. Mishkan is the place in my life that I set aside for the visits with my mentors, living and gone, who guide me and push me to be a better partner and father, brother, son, and friend. On my journey, they are with me as long as I take the time to ready the chamber. I want to conclude with a few words of theology. The Agadah is a story of a God who feels the pain of distance and articulates the desire to be close again. It is a story of a God who once built a home for us, who is now heartbroken and lonely and calling on us for company. Many of the teens in our communities are feeling the pain of distance and longing for a closeness that they once felt. Our role as cantors and rabbis and teachers is to build the space, the Mishkan, for them to gather and to reconnect with Torah. May we each merit the opportunity to contribute to such a tent.